Cool. And we are live. Awesome. All right. Well, that doesn't feel any different than what we were doing in backstage anyway. It's just it's a button press. All right. All right. So hello everyone, and welcome to the first Code Power session of 2024. My name is Frankie, and I'm the new community manager. Oh, sorry. Sorry about that.
Take two.
No, so I was watching, right, and I love this because it's live, right? Of course. And so I refreshed my screen over here on YouTube, and then I all of a sudden I heard myself. I'm like, oh gosh, yes, I have to mute it. All right, well let's continue on. All right, so yes, well let's go ahead and take a step backwards. Yeah, so welcome to the very first Code Power session of 2024. My name is Frankie, and I'm the new community manager for the code program here at VMware by Broadcom. I also have the pleasure of being your host today. So let's kick this off. And with us today, we have Craig Johnston. He's an EUC staff solutions engineer here at VMware by Broadcom. Craig, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hey, Frankie, I'm really happy to be here today. I've been in the IT space for a long time, really, probably from the late 80s. If you can believe it, when I started, the IP protocol was not the one that anybody actually used. It was all Vines IP and IPX and XeroxNet. And even when IP came along, DHCP didn't exist. So it was the bad old days of networking. And so I started my career in networking, and around about 2000, I transitioned to mobile. And that was the days of the BlackBerry, if anybody remembers those. And then, of course, later on when the iPhone and Android came out, I started to be an AirWatch admin. And eventually I got to work for VMware. And so I'm still here today. And basically my career has brought me into the mobile space. And so I do UEM or device management now.
Oh, man, that's super cool. Yeah, I remember being jealous about people that had the Blackberries, and I'm like, oh man, those people, like they would take out the little Blackberries, or the people that had the little pilots with the little stylus. Like, oh man, those people, yeah, like that. Those people must be important. If they have a BlackBerry or one of those, like man, they must be in business. And oh man,
very important people. That's right.
Yes, I remember one of my first phones was the what was it? I think we had AT&T bought them. It was some orange company, and it was a little flip phone.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, we bought it just for emergency purposes. And yeah, I remember throwing it to people. Yeah, it was yes, I would throw it. I would toss it to people, not completely throw it, but so that people on my soccer team after practice can call their parents trying to get picked up. And oh man, it was awesome. Yeah, I loved having a phone. And then but of course, right, you give somebody an inch and they take a mile.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, as soon as I saw the BlackBerry, somebody else was like, hold on, I'm not important enough. Yeah, like I need to get to that status one day. Awesome. Yeah, and so one thing too about Craig, the first time I spoke to Craig in as we were prepping for the session too, and a couple days ago, right, is Craig's voice. I'm so happy that other people get to share in this, right? I'm sure your customers too, right? They love hearing you. But I shared a recording that you made for us with the code coaches, and yeah, it was the response. I shared it with you. That Patrick gave back was, yeah, we can listen to you all day. It doesn't matter what you're talking about. So. All right.
Well, thank you. You're making me blush.
All right. So I'll go ahead and get out of your way for a little bit. Yeah, let's get this party started. And yeah, go ahead and teach us a little bit about WS1 and TIDBYT.
Yes, absolutely. So TIDBYT, which is what you're seeing on the screen, is a very low tech box that can sit on your desk or on a shelf. It's got LEDs. This is not actually a screen you're seeing. It's individual LEDs. That's 64 cross by 32 down, very low resolution. and each of them are RGB, and so they can show any colors. And so the idea is that you write some script or widget, and the widget produces an image, a moving image, and that moving image is sent to the TIDBYT, and it plays that moving image. And you can have multiple of them running one after the other, as you can see on the screen here. Like there's the weather, and I think we saw the Tetris clock earlier. There we go. And so the images can animate, but they can also show important information. There's a lot of applications that TIDBYT have written, but also the community have written. We'll take a look at some of them so you can get an idea. There's obviously lots of weather applications and stock tickers and sports. As I say, it's all this glanceable information. It's a little bit of a tidbit of information on the screen at a time. And as you walk past, you're just basically keeping up to date with the things that you follow. So I got one of these TIDBYTs. There's a competing product called Glance that's out there that looks almost identical to this, but it doesn't have an SDK, so you can't write apps for it. So essentially, it's curated by the company. So I was drawn to the TIDBYT simply because it's got a programming SDK, so you can actually write your own widgets. So I thought, well, I wonder if we can show Workspace ONE information on a TIDBYT, because that would be useful. I can imagine an administrator sitting with a TIDBYT on his desk, and it can show different bits of important information that they would be interested in their tenant. How many devices, or how many are enrolled, or what types of devices, and so on. So I started looking into it. The first thing is for everybody to know that Workspace ONE has APIs. So on the screen, I'm just showing you the URL you go to your tenant /API/help. It'll show you the list of APIs, and there's some really good documentation here that tells you how to actually use them. But then the next trick is, well, what language does the TIDBYT actually use? And I discovered it uses a language called Starlark. And Starlark is what's part of a product that used to be called Blaze. An internal product from Google called Blaze. They released it and they called it Bazel, which essentially is Blaze with letters mixed up. And so Bazel uses this language called Starlark. And this is what the TIDBYT uses as well. And Starlark is a dialect of Python. So if anybody knows Python, it's a very, very easy to use language. And so therefore Starlark should not be too difficult to get into. However, saying that, I've never written any modern programs in any modern languages. The last time I wrote a program was on an Apple II, in AppleSoft Basic. And so I haven't programmed in decades. And this is actually an Apple II emulator here. So I had quite a task in front of me. I had to tackle this issue of how do I get the knowledge to start writing these applications. But I took it on, and I decided to write a couple of applications just to start off with. And the first one I wrote was this one here. This is a simulator that shows you what it would look like in the TIDBYT. So this is a widget that runs on the TIDBYT showing you your device breakouts, number of devices in your tenant. Okay, and so let's have a look at what the code looks like. So those of you interested in writing your own, because I was going on this journey of learning it from scratch, I thought I would write comments in my application so that anybody would just come and be able to take my application and tweak it and use it for their own purposes. So this is the application that we were just showing that produces this. And the way the applications are broken up is, of course, in the beginning, you declare all of your libraries, which are the different pieces of code that you need to lean on in the application. For example, if you need to encode and decode base64, you would load up this one. If you needed to query HTTP, for example, you would load up this one. And so that's the first part of the application. And then you can set some variables, like I'm setting up some fonts here. So the text used here in the white part is this font called Tom Thumb. And the blue scrolling text at the top is using a font called 5x8. So I'm just setting up a variable for that so I can call it later. And then to make the application useful for everybody, the information that we need from you is your organization group ID. We need your tenant code. And then, of course, we need an admin username and password, which has got the role of API. You can actually create an admin user that just can do API calls. And then what we do is we encode username and password with base 64. So I'm saying base 64 encode admin :password. And then I create a variable called author, which essentially is the word basic with a space and then the base encoded password right over there. So we do that encoding right in the application, which is why I needed this up here so I can do that encoding. All right, so once we've got all the information in there, I've actually put some variables that keep track of the queries. So this is the actual API query that I'm going to run to get the devices. And this is a query that actually figures out your root OG. So I actually call two of them. And then I create a URL by using the tenant URL variable that I asked for up here, plus the query, plus the OG variable that you typed in here earlier. And then that's how I'm going to do the query. Is that making sense so far, Frankie?
Yeah, yes. Yeah, I'm taking my notes of questions to ask, but yeah, no, I love that you have this in order, right? And then your definitely all the comments. Yeah, the first question that comes to, yeah, the first question that I wrote was that the fonts. Can you use any fonts? Are you limited to stuff? Can it be smaller? Can it be, yeah.
Yes, you actually are limited to the fonts. There's a published page onto the TIDBYT website, the developer website, that tells you the names of the fonts. So you can you have to adhere to their fonts. But they've got a good range. They've got fonts of all different sizes. Some of them are uppercase only, some of them are lowercase and uppercase and so on. So there's a good choice around there.
Excellent. Yeah, no, yeah, no, that answers that. I love the idea of this, right? Because it's from the non-technical point of view, right? Like if you have this on your desk, right? If you have this on the side or something, and it is a great conversation starter, right? An icebreaker for people that are a little bit more introverted as well, right? Say, yeah, I know a lot of people work remote, but now that we're coming back into the office, I love this idea right there. Yeah, I'm not going to steer the conversation away, but yeah, I had a boss before that had a little light on top of his desk, and the little light was connected to his Teams, I believe. And every single time that he was busy, it would turn red or green, right? So that, yeah, you knew that you were right. So I loved it. And then yeah, something like this, right? Instead of having a, well, not instead of having a knock, right? Like, yeah, I love all these little things that you can do with this. Have you been able to test from your the URL of
Yes.
the other API calls, all the other ones, and like we can just replace that one and it should work?
Yeah, so that's why I made this sort of in a modular way. So the first thing is, if you don't want to make any changes and you want it to look just like this, then all you need to do is you go to GitHub and you download the code, and all you need to do is fill in this information. Like, for example, what is the OG index number? Is it 560 or something? And in GitHub, it tells you how to find that number. And then what's your tenant code, which is what you would need when you make an API call. What's the admin user? So you just have to plug this information in. And once you get to this point, you've finished. Sorry, the tenant URL is the last thing you plug in. You know, that's AS and then the tenant name. And once you plug this in, your app is going to run just like you see on the screen here, but it's going to show your tenant information and your devices. So that's the first prize. But the second prize is, as you said, with all the comments down here, I'm showing people what the API is, so you could replace it with what you see in the AirWatch documentation for the API that you want to call.
Awesome. And so so this exact API, if you can flip over to the tab that has the API documentation, did that long string right there, is it, yeah, yeah, forgive me, right? I'm not I don't know, I don't really know how to use APIs, so I love this, right? This is a great project, and it seems pretty easy, right? And I'm just excited.
Yeah, so look, this is an idea of what these things look like, what these API calls look like. You see this over here. It tells you exactly what it is. If if you click on one of them, it even gives you some sample code, like what you should expect to get back. You can even test the API right here in our console. So it's actually very easy to practice because you can just plug it in. So you try it out. So as long as you actually log in with test credentials, you can try these APIs out right in our console, which I love. But the way that most people test out APIs, I think, is by using an application called Postman. So I'm going to show that to you now. So Postman is a free application. It allows you to test your APIs, and it'll show you the results. So this is an API call. Yeah, so I've got the tenant, and then I've got the actual URL to the call, and then I'm providing it information. So I'm providing it group ID 570, for example. And then of course you've got your authorization here, which then gets turned into base 64 for you by Postman. And then you've got your information that you need to provide, like the tenant code. You need to tell it that we're expecting JSON code back. And if I run this, I'll go to the one that actually works. If I run this, what happens is you get JSON back. So this is actually what you get back from our servers. So you see the information is all in there, right? It's sitting in there. But now the trick is, how do you pass that information programmatically? That's tricky because it's not immediately obvious how you do it by looking at this code. And it actually took me, I would say, days trying to figure out how to do that, because I was wondering, looking at other people's code and thinking you would just step through it like this. You'd go to total device and you step down here and you can look at those values. It doesn't work that way. So I've got a trick for everybody, which is very useful. So when you make an API call and it comes back to you, paste that API call into one of these JSON decoders, because then the information you see on the right is how you're actually going to step through the JSON code to get information out of it. So you see here, it doesn't have any numbers in it, but over here it does. So the way that you would look for information is you would call, I'll show you in the code now, but you would call what you see here. For example, if you want the first OG, you would make sure that you're looking for number 1 over here. And then if you want the next OG, you would look at number 2. But over here, you see there's no numbers. They just don't exist over here in the code, but they really do exist, and you can see them here. So if I want to extract some information from all this mess here, I need to know how to step down the values that I see in here to get the correct information. For example, if I'm looking for the name of the OG, there it is right there. But I need to know how to get that information. So I'll show you how it's handled in Starlock. So let's just go down to that part. All right, so here's how it's handled. So I'll start up here by saying this is the main part of the application. And here's, I'm doing the API call right here. So here I'm doing HTTP GET. I'm calling the URL. I'm providing in some headers, authorization. I'm saying I want JSON code back. I'm giving it the tenant code, and I'm using the variables for that. And then I'm checking to make sure that that actually works. So if I don't get a 200 back, then the application will fail. I'm getting some information from the JSON code here. I'm saying the root OG is here. So you see how I'm stepping through the code. I'm going to location groups, then I'm going to 0, and then I'm looking for location group name. So if we go back here, what do we see? Location group 0, location group name. You see that?
Yeah.
Now, if you look at this side, it doesn't have a 0. So how do you do it? I mean, I started off by looking for location groups and then location group name. It didn't work. As I said, it took me days. But the 0 is the very important thing, which you can only really see once you decode the JSON. Okay, so the way you get information out of the JSON code is by stepping through it and looking for a specific value there. So now I've got root OG is this, because I've told it how to go and find it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's a great cheat code, right? I think how you said, right? It's oh man, I'm telling I would be completely lost. Yeah, and see, and if it took you days, oh gosh, thank you, right? Thank you for going through that pain, and so that we can have this beautifulness. Yeah.
Yeah. So now that I've got the root OG, what I do is I do another call using the root OG, and I get back all of the values for the different device types. But in Starlock, I discovered that you actually need to create variables with 0.0 to start off with if you want to count them up. So the first thing you do is you have to make sure that the value is actually there. So let me explain what I mean. So when we return JSON code, we don't always put the values in the JSON code if there's no devices in the console. Like if there were no iOS devices, you would not have a list of iOS devices in there. So what you have to do first is you have to see, is that key in the code first? Is it in the JSON first? So I start by saying, I'm going to go to platforms and Apple, and is that code actually there? So let's just have a look at that. There we go. Okay, so I go to platforms Apple, and I'm looking to see, does this even exist? Because in our console, when we return JSON, if there were no Apple devices, there would be nothing here. Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure why it's done that way, because I was actually expecting it to be listing all of the device types that we support with zeros next to the ones that we don't have any devices for. Anyway, it's no big deal, because you just step through the code looking for each one of these to make sure that they're there, because like somebody might not have any Macs in their tenant, right? So you need to make sure that you check for that first. All right, so that's what I'm doing here. I'm checking to see if there's an Apple. And if there isn't, then I'll just set iOS to 0. And however, if there is Apple, right, then I'm going to count iOS up by 1. So I'm just making a little loop here, and I'm going through the loop, and I'm counting the iOS devices in the tenant. So I just do that for every device type. So that makes sure I don't trip myself up, because if the JSON does not have, for example, say iOS devices in it, the code would just break and would just stop working.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, so this part of it, we're getting all of the data ready to go. So we're extracting the data from JSON, we're getting it ready. And the third part of the application is rendering the data. All right, so again, I've got this huge big comment, a bunch of comment lines talking about what I'm doing in this section here. So I'll just explain what I'm doing. So the TIDBYT renders out information in an interesting way. So if this is the section that does the rendering, always under render root. And so you can have child objects and children objects, and I'll explain what that's all about. So if we just go back and have a look at my application running, you'll notice that there's a logo, and then there's this, the OG title is scrolling like this. And then there's a list of devices and the number of devices in the tenant, right? So the way that's created is you have to start off by saying that you want to render a column. In this case, so I want a column, so everything's in a column from top to bottom. So that's the first thing. And then you want to tell the code that you have children in that column, and each child it has to render on a separate line. So the first child is a row, and that row has also got its own children, because that row consists of a logo and text. All right. So this row
is a lot of kids.
The logo and the text. Sorry, you asking?
No. It's just a lot of kids, right? Yeah.
A lot of kids. Yeah. So the first column is here. Then you're telling it the column has got children, but the very first child in the column in the column has got its own children. So that's how it's broken out. So we've got the logo, and I need to go back and show you how to get the logo actually. And then you've got marquee. You render a marquee, which essentially tells TIDBYT if the text is too long to fit there, you need to scroll it. So some people have OGs that the name will fit in here, but in this case it doesn't. So we just tell it to marquee, and then he has all the other children. We're just rendering out the different text for Android, iOS, Mac OS, and Windows. So we put a bit of text there, and TIDBYT has got this strange thing, or should I say Starlark, where you have to put the variable that you want to paste in there, but then you actually put the variable here. So it's strange. So I've got Android, and if we look at this, it says 199, right? That's the number, but the number is actually over here, total Android. And then I choose the font height is 6, and I call the font size, which is that Tom Thumb font that I showed earlier. But I made sure it's only 6 pixels high. So that's 6 pixels, leaving a gap for the next row and a gap above it there. And that's how I do the rest of the rendering. And then that's the application. It's quite easy to do. Essentially declare libraries, declare variables, get all the data somehow. And that might be things like rendering getting JSON and extracting data from it. It could be doing an API call and getting the data from that. It could be all kinds of things. In the case of the Tetris clock, that's just getting the time. So there's no API calls there. And then the third part is render it on the screen, render your application. And this is the part that is important, because that's what the TIDBYT actually shows. So what you do here is what it makes it look like this. So that's
Awesome.
essentially it. The last thing I forgot to mention was, how do you do images? So let me just talk about that quickly. So you notice this one row had an image in it called WS icon. And the way that you create images is, I'm bringing up a terminal here, is you have to turn the image into base64 encoding. So on a Mac and Windows, you just type base64-I, which means give me a file name, and then you get the name of the image. If I press enter, you'll see it creates a whole bunch of base64 code on the screen, right? This is the image in base64. More useful if you do this and you pipe it to PG copy. Is it PG copy? I think it is PG copy. Then it goes to the GP copy. I think it is GP copy. No, I've got it in the code actually. Let me go find my notes.
Oh, the PB.
There we go.
PB copy. There we go.
PB copy. It sends it to the clipboard. So you see here.
Yeah.
If you do PB copy, it sends it to the clipboard, which is what you want, because you actually have to paste it in here. So any image that you want TIDBYT to show, you have to create a variable for it, do base64 decoding on the image, and then paste in here the code that you get from doing the base64 command. So if you put it in your clipboard, you can just do a Command V to paste it in here, Control V on Windows to paste it in here. Now you've got yourself an image in the application. In fact, the only way to get applications into a TIDBYT application is to encode them in base64. So there are some applications out there that you have on your TIDBYT that grab the image from a web URL, but it does the same thing. It does base64 encoding on that image to turn it into base64 code. There's no way to attach images into your application. This is the only way to do it. All right, so I've been speaking for a while. Does it all make sense? Does it look easy?
Oh my gosh, right? So there's a lot. There's a ton going on, right? And this is from like when we spoke, and I kind of looked at this. I did not right. I don't have a TIDBYT of my own, but and you know what? I did not look at this code prior to, but as I was following along, and yeah, you had mentioned, right, that Starlark, right?
Starlark, yeah.
So it's some sort of a deviant or something like that from Python. I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I probably understand. And I thought it was just APIs and Python, but then you bring up all these other things, right? And then this base64, and it's there's a lot going on, right there. But what is exciting is that there's a lot of opportunity to learn and play around with different things to ultimately come up with this goal. And yeah, like it gives you an opportunity. Like I didn't know about this with base64, right? Over here on the left, and it's it is just so fun that you can just take this in multiple directions. What do you see as being the most useful API call to display on here? Or I imagine the one that you have right there, right?
Well, I made two of them. I made one that shows the count of device types in your tenant, which some people might want as a useful, because obviously this changes over time. You can imagine if you're doing a rollout, you probably want to see these numbers going up. So instead of you having to pull a report from the console or log into the console, even just to look at that information, it'll just be automatically updating on your desk with this code. The other one I did was this one here, which shows enrollments. So which devices have been enrolled, which have been registered, and which have been unenrolled, which is another value that people tend to keep track of, because if you have devices that are unenrolled, but they haven't been deleted, it means that we are counting that as a license. And so you may want to know, why do you have so many enrolled devices? So I think I can run that and just show you quickly what it looks like. Let's see this one. There we go. So the one thing I forgot to mention is the Pixlet application is you have to have that on your computer, and there's instructions on the TIDBYT website of how to install it. But what's great about it is that you can do what I'm doing here is you tell it to serve up your application as you creating it, and this is actually what creates this simulation of what it looks like. And so you just got a localhost 8080. If I do a refresh now, you'll see it's a different application running now because I'm telling it to serve up this other one. So you can see here, this is total number of devices, pending, enrolled, and unenrolled. So again, useful information that you might want as an administrator. One thing I was going to talk about since I'm on the screen is you're probably wondering, well, what's this text on the right of the simulation? So what happens is if you write an application and you want to submit it to the community, meaning that it shows up in the App Store, the TIDBYT App Store, and you need the person using the widget to type information in, then you actually have to add pieces of code to your application to ask for that information. And so this is actually what comes up in the iOS and Android application. So as you can see, I'm saying I need the root OG ID, and I also put a little bit of text that tells people how to find it. It's the number at the end of the URL after navigating to the OG details page. And so you would type that in there on your phone. So that's how the application would collect the information from you. So instead of you manually typing it in here, what's the number? It's 111.
Yeah.
On your iOS application, you would bring up the widget and type 111, right? And it would take that information into account, and it would then render your tenant. So the other way to run these applications is by not submitting it to the community, just running it on your own server somewhere on a Raspberry Pi or something, because the Pixlet can install on Linux. And so you can run your application, and I've actually got an example of it on GitHub. So if you just look at my README down the bottom here, I'll talk about that. To have this application update, you basically need to render it. So you have Pixlet render. So you render your application, and that creates the image file, which ends in WebP. So you render your application, which means it gets updated information, and then you push it to your Pixel. And your Pixel is going to have an API token, which you can look up, and your device ID, which you can look up. And then so you are self-contained. You're pushing your own applications to your own TIDBYT, even though it might also have public applications on it. And so that's the two ways to run these things, is you just take my code, put your numbers and details in here, and then just create a little script that renders the application and then pushes it out to your TIDBYT device. And it's as easy as that. There might be reasons why you don't want to make it a public application. And so, or maybe it doesn't make sense for it to be a public application. So one good example might be that you might start getting information from vCenter. So I started writing this one about vCenter, and vCenters are typically on-prem. So there's no point in submitting it to the community. But you would put all your numbers in here, all your information in here, and you would query vCenter, and you just run it on your own Raspberry Pi server. Let it run and provide information to your TIDBYT locally.
Yeah, and when you first brought this up, or yeah, when you finally showed me, I'm sorry, yeah, when I finally asked and you showed me what a TIDBYT was, and how you can connect, I was like, oh my gosh, APIs. I was like, oh, that's a buzzword that I've heard before. I've never used, but buzzword. And but as soon as you said no, it's just this, right? You kind of give me a 500,000 foot level view of this, and I was like, oh my gosh. And then the first thing that I thought about was hackathon, and I was like, okay, you know what, this is hackathon stuff, right? This is the kind of stuff that is right, to show the public, that you don't have to be well well, you know what, yeah, like you can take what somebody else has done and make it your own, right? Like,
Yes.
if obviously this took a ton of work by somebody very well versed in a lot of these different things. And
Self-taught, really. I wouldn't
yeah.
say I'm well-versed, but I would say self-taught.
Yeah, and oh yeah, definitely. And how when you started off, you said this is a little bit of Python, but it's not that you knew Python, right? Yeah, so you taught yourself, you went through the process, and this is the beauty of the community, right? Where now you're sharing this, and if somebody does want to look at this and take it to the next level and see how this can help their environment, right?
Hmm.
Like I don't really use Workspace One, or yeah, I use it. I've never managed Workspace One.
Right.
My background is from, yes, from a vCenter, ESXi, that yeah, the infrastructure side of the
Mm.
house on that side. And to me, yeah, the super exciting part would be this right here, the vCenter Health, right? Something like this to look at, and right again, you can take what you have and build upon it. And if you just do a little bit of work, right, and then just ask for help, right, and
Mm.
that's why people like you are here. So is it okay if people reach out to you, and I would assume through GitHub, right, and just go to your page?
Sure, or just email me. That's my email address. But yeah, I'm happy to coach people through stuff that I know, and I'm sure other people can coach me. And I'm sure there's a developer watching this video who thinks, "Wow, this code is really bad. It's kindergarten code," you know. But that's I know that, but that's okay. I got it to do its thing. Like one of the things that people always say is, "Well, why don't your variables camel code?" Which is, I don't know if you know what it is. It's like starting with a lowercase letter first.
I've never heard camel code.
Yeah,
No.
and so that's a that's a strict way of doing it, but of course the application doesn't care. It allows you to visually find things quicker. But anyway, so this is one of these mistakes I'm making, but it's not a catastrophic one.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, I'm happy to help, and there's a GitHub community that are very, very helpful as well. And there's lots of documentation online. For example, the Starlark code. There's a whole GitHub that has repository that has documentation on Starlark and how to use it and examples of how to do things. So there's lots of help out there.
All right. So you said that this can run on Linux. So do you need a tidbit, or can I just download the software, right? The tidbit software, use your code, and then just have one of these running, right? And just in a different browser
Yeah,
somewhere
of
and just out
course.
to the side.
Yeah, I mean, this is a simulation of what the tidbit looks like. It doesn't get it exactly right because if you can imagine, this is a screen with pixels on it, whereas the tidbit itself has LEDs. So the look is very different. But this is a good approximation of what it looks like. So you can absolutely do that. You can install Pixlet. In fact, I'm sure there's time quickly to go and have a look at the tidbit dev site. But you just go here and you can click on build and it tells you what to do. Tells you need to install Pixlet, and there's a Linux version of Pixlet, there's a Mac OS version and a Windows version. So like I say, you can run this on a Raspberry Pi, no problem, because Pixlet will install there. And then you can either serve up your web server there, or you can at least render your code out and push it to the tidbit from your Raspberry Pi.
Hmm. Excellent. Yeah, yeah. Because again, right? It's just another opportunity. When I look at learning something, right? Yeah, where yeah, I always want to level up, but if something's too hard, right? If something seems too hard, or if something is like just it, in my head, like it's gonna take me days or even weeks or months, then I may give it a go. But if I have something fun to play with, then
Mm,
it's like, oh, hey, you know what, this can give me that immediate satisfaction. Maybe not immediate, but like, yeah, this with the information that I have in my environment, and I can download it and see it, right, without actually having the tidbit yet. Then yeah, that this is the kind of stuff that will get me excited.
yeah.
um
But I
okay.
would say buy yourself a tidbit. They're not very expensive. I think they're about to release a second version now, which they say is going to have a speaker in it. So I'm not exactly sure what that allows you to do, but they said 8-bit sounds. I think they're trying to keep it as retro as possible because it is a bit of a retro looking device. If you think about it, it's just this very old fashioned looking box with LEDs, very low resolution. So I don't know what they're going to add there, but they're not terribly expensive. And as I say, it's glanceable information. It's that stuff that instead of pulling out your phone to have a look at, you just walk past your bookshelf and there it is, or you have it on your desk showing your Workspace ONE stats along with maybe the Tetris clock, just things like that. So you can have fun mixed with work. So that's what I like to think of it.
Yeah, since okay, so what if in my here in my home lab, what if all I have is a couple of ESXi boxes?
Hmm.
Well, did and again, right? Yeah, how I said, I I love having you here so I can ask you these questions, and because I believe there are API calls that make you can make to ESXi. Is
You can, yeah.
okay, all right, and then yeah, some display some stuff, and okay, all right, yeah. So it seems doable, right? With the bare minimum kind of stuff,
Yes,
and yeah, that
absolutely.
okay, awesome. When do you think? When do you think that the V Center Health um, program that you're working on will be ready so we can have you back? Because I would love to see that.
Well, I mean, we can talk about it quickly if you want. It's nothing crazy. I did it just to practice, actually, just to see could I do it. But if you want
Yeah.
to spend a couple of minutes, or yeah, I'll just spend 30 seconds talking about what's different when you query vCenter to what it is when you query Workspace ONE.
Oh, please. Yes, yes, and yeah, we have time. I don't have any more appointments after this. Yes, I'm here to learn.
So it's in my home lab as well, and because I'm a big Back to the Future fan, my URL is 88milesper.net. So,
Nice.
so yeah, so I have a vCenter running in my home lab as well. And my goal was to just show a screen on the TIDBYT that showed the color of the load values for memory storage and things like that. So you see, I'm actually making the queries here. You can see I've got the overall health color query. When you make this query, it gives you a color back. It'll say green, yellow, red, and so on. So first you have to use the URL, right? So that's the URL. Obviously, you need to provide your login. Notice that I haven't actually gone around to decoding, and I just put the decoded value there. As
Mhm.
before, I set up the fonts. As before, I set up my libraries, and I need to have time. So I loaded up the time module as well. So anyway, I'm going to do all these queries. I'm going to look for the load health, memory health, storage health. When was the last time that it was checked? And then what I do is I actually set the URLs. So I say the session query URL is the vCenter URL plus the create session part of the URL. The way that the vCenter APIs work is you have to first get a session ID. So the very first thing is before you query any of these, you have to create a session ID. So that's why you have to do that first. So you create a session ID. I'll show you what that looks like. So I'm going to create a session ID here. So now I've got the session ID. So I need to take that session ID. I put it in this variable here. And then when I make my other queries, I have to actually put that session ID in here. So we just scroll over, you'll see that it's in here. There it is, VMware session ID. So I use the session ID from my previous query, and then I make new queries. So now I get back the values. So I'm saying if it's green, make it this number. This is the web color code. So this
Mhm.
is a green color and
Yeah.
so on. And then I do that for every single value that I'm querying. Again, this is probably terrible code because look at how I'm doing it. There's probably a much more efficient way to do what I'm just doing there, but either way,
Yeah.
it works. So I do it for all of the things I want to query, and then all I do is I put it on I render it out. So it's a little bit different to the Workspace ONE because you have to get yourself a session ID first, but otherwise the rest of it is basically calling vCenter with a different API call, passing it the variables that you want to get back, and then rendering that on the screen. And so hopefully I'll finish it up and I'll just add it to the GitHub repository. I think
Excellent.
it was not that different from what we just spoke about. It's just a different way of doing it.
Mhm. Yeah, no, I think to me, so where I'm envisioning this, right, as making it usable or like a practical use for it, right? Like yes, we can learn from it, we can play with this, but from a practical use case, I remember being in meetings with C-level people, and at the companies at the company that I work with, when I was a customer, and the conversation changes, right? So you and your coworkers, you can get into the nitty gritty. You go up one level, right? Supervisor manager, you can still get there, but a
Hmm.
little bit less, right? Yeah, and then yeah, when you get next, right, you have to speak to the level of the people. Um, And when I would speak to the CTO, all they wanted to know, right, was the impact. Are we okay? And how much does it cost, right? Stuff
Hmm.
like that. Um, and to have something like this, especially color coded, right? I remember leveraging operations, right? ARIA operations, and we had that, and that would be presented in a knock, and yeah, it would go through different screens to show status, but this simplifies it even more, right? So
Sure.
yeah, I said with your vCenter, okay, here show this data center, and we have multiple data centers, and we can pull something like this. Okay, what are the colors, right? And just a quick glance, and imagine, I can imagine, man, this sitting in the office somewhere. Well, yeah, sitting in the office of my boss's boss, and just, hey, what is that? Oh, that's the status, right? You see, it's always green, because the vCenter is awesome.
It's always green. Yeah.
It's just scrolling through all our locations, all our global locations. Everything is green, and yes, if I see something, then there you go. Yes, when it turns orange, when it turns yellow or red, right?
Yeah.
That is when I'm expecting to see some sort of report of what's going on, right? And I love this for something like that.
Yeah.
Oh
Absolutely.
man, oh, this is cool, man. I love it.
So one last tip for you, Frankie, is when you start developing, um, my tip is do this. Serve your application up, because every time you save it, it actually the Pixel application sees that there's a change and it reloads it. But the other thing is, while the Pixel application is running, if you use the print command, you can actually print information you've gathered in your application on in the terminal screen, which is really good for when you're practicing. So before you even get to render the information out on the TIDBYT, you can actually see that information show up here in the terminal window. So you see, this is what I'm doing here because I'm still writing the application. So I'm making sure I'm printing out, I'm making sure that I'm getting it right. I'm putting it on the screen here so I can have a look at it. And then once you've got it 100%, you get rid of all your print statements. You don't need to have information showing up here anymore. But while you're practicing, it's so useful to actually be able to do a print and print that information out. So am I getting the URL correct? What's the JSON that comes back? What does it look like? Or am I getting the time correct? All these kinds of things. You just print your data here. A lot of IDEs have that ability to do, but Pixel has it too. The last thing I'd say is I'm using Visual Studio Code as my IDE. It's a very good one. It's free, and you can actually plug in your different languages into it, so it knows how to color represent the different languages. So you can actually install the Basil one, which includes Starlark, and then it helps you with your code. Because if you ask anybody who writes code, it's getting to close all of your parentheses correctly. And what's great about this is it color codes them. So if you have a lot of stacking like this, it puts color codes next to them. So when you want to close them, you can look up and see, well, okay, I closed the blue one from here. The purple one's closed. The yellow one's closed. You can keep track of where you opened them and where you closed them. It's very useful. I love it.
Oh, super. Yeah, I remember when I first started. I started I started using something like this with Power CLI, and but it was all in Notepad plus
Mm.
plus, and
Hmm.
then yes, when when I saw VS Code, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is next level. And again, right, just from going from that flip phone, right, flip phone Notepad plus plus to a BlackBerry, which is this, right? It's like, oh, hey, these people again, right? These people are on another level. So no, and I love it.
Well, I'm glad you do. Any other questions for me?
No, no other questions. Yeah, I'll make sure to add. Yes, well, in the description notes, yeah, we do have a link to GitHub, a link to what TIDBYT is, right here on the site. I'm also going to add a different link, two other links that I took note of. But no, I don't have any other questions. Yeah, this was a great, man. This was awesome. We got to hear your sweet voice too, and learn something, right? And I appreciate your time. Thank you very much, Craig, for kicking us off, and thank you everybody for watching. And I promise next time I'll make sure that the comments are enabled so that people can ask questions live. All
Well,
right,
thank you
thank
very
you
much for
everyone.
having me on, Frankie. And all I can ask is if you if you find what I've done useful, please send me an email and let me know, or send me a link to your app so I can have a look at it, because I love to know that it's making a difference.
Excellent. Okay, everyone. All right. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. All right. Take care, everyone. Bye. And